Hi, welcome to my weekly live stream where I discuss about UI design, about SwiftUI, how to implement your own design, and how to use some of the latest tools and techniques in this industry. Today, we're going to discuss about dark mode, so how to design for dark mode, to pick the colors, to have the right contrast ratio. We're also going to explore the angular blur gradient that we have right here. And I think that's really interesting to explore. And we're going to see how we can potentially do that in code later. Also, I want to show you how to annotate. So we're going to be using some Figma plugins to facilitate the feedback process with your team. So with that said, hopefully this is working well. If you do enjoy these live streams, by the way, I try to do these weekly, and please give a thumbs up. And if you have any topics that you want to recommend for the next ones, just let me know in the comments below. All right, so let's talk a little bit about dark mode. First of all, depending on the platform that you were designing for, either for iOS or for Android, they do have a portion about colors and specifically about dark mode. So for example, on iOS, typically you're going to be using black as a background, and the text is going to be between white and gray. So in SwiftUI, you have two colors that are typically used that automatically switch from light to dark mode, and it's primary and secondary. So color.primary, color.secondary, and it's, you know, if you don't have like super custom colors, typically I would recommend using that. But otherwise, what I like to do in my design is to actually use transparency instead of gray. So dot secondary in SwiftUI is actually gray and not like transparent. Here, I'm actually using from my design system, it's white with 70% opacity. And the reason why I'm doing this is so that it adapts better to, let's say, on top of specific colors such as this one. So if this was going to be gray, for example, it's not going to look as good compared to, let's say, using opacity. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So if you scroll down a little bit, another thing about dark mode is that when your element is in the background, it's more towards the black, and when it's elevated, so a second layer on top of the background, it's going to be slightly gray. And the reason why it's black is so that it blends really well with the bezel of the phone. So if you look at your iPhone, for example, you're going to see that you don't really see the bezel, and that's kind of the point of dark mode. And also, the less color, the less brightness that you use, the more that you're going to save in terms of battery. I don't know exactly how much, but definitely has an influence. Of course, using dark mode is crucial nowadays. Like Apple went really big on this one since iOS 13, because we all start to use our phones at night a lot. We like to code at night, so with the updates, with the dark mode on both macOS and iOS and Android, you're going to see that this is almost essential for any app. So you're going to have to design your app for dark mode. For Android itself, you have a place for dark theme. And it's quite not as black, I would say, in terms of background. So they do use more like dark gray. And I'm not like super familiar with Android, as I mostly work with iOS. But from their guidelines, it seemed that they're definitely using more on the dark gray side and not fully black. So, but the same principles apply. You're gonna use either white or light gray as a secondary color. And of course, you're gonna be using your accent color, which is for the action buttons and the buttons, as well as some of the elements that you want to capture the attention for. So in Android, you also have this incredible tool for colors, which lets you set a primary color, but also it gives you these analogous colors that are next to that main color. And it's really important to use this if you're not too familiar with colors or comfortable with colors. Try to not adventure too much into the um, to the complementary colors or the other ones. Try to use a color that kind of have different tones. So you have a primary color, and then if this is purple, for example, or you can use like another hue, you can see that it adapts automatically. So for example, I'm using blue or I'm using pink or red, then you have these sort of colors that are next to it, the tones from dark to light. And that's essentially what you would do for the accent colors. But otherwise, let's go back to the design here. One thing to note is, especially when I talk about colors, a lot of developers, a lot of designers, they see as colors as, okay, it's pretty, it's aesthetic, it's inspiring. At the same time, I would say it's a bit dangerous to think of colors as just aesthetics, right? Colors have a functionality, which is to capture the attention and set the visual hierarchy in the right places. And that's why when it comes to a background, such as this one, try to not use like a vibrant color. So this is one mistake that I see a lot of people do, is that they will try to use like a very vibrant color as a background. If you do that, then your buttons, whatever you want to prioritize, is going to receive less attention, and so it's going to try to compete with that background color. So if you want to use a background color, try to use something that is a little bit more neutral, such as black, dark gray, and in this case, I'm using dark blue. Now, why am I using dark blue? Well, I guess because I want to push a little bit. I like dark blue a lot, and of course, I could use black, which I did in the previous version, in the current version that is currently in test flight. And one thing that we also use is an off-white, so slightly bluish off-white for the main color. And the reason why I'm using the off-white is so that if I have an element like this one or this one, I can make it white, and it's going to show the hierarchy, so the layer on top of the background. And so that creates a very nice effect. And this is what we use for the light mode. For the dark mode, as I mentioned before, you can use black. This is typically most apps. It fits very well with the iOS guidelines. But at the same time, if you do want to push more, you can definitely use the dark mode with a custom color, such as blue in my case. And it just requires a little bit more effort. For example, you're going to have to set a custom color for the background. Versus, in SwiftUI, if you want to use black, you don't really need to set it because it automatically sets the background for you. But if you use like a custom dark blue, for example, like this one, you can see that you have a little bit more work to do. That's all, and that's totally fine. If you have the resources, you have the patience to do it, go for it. Like I said, it's important to set the hierarchy. So for example, you have this one that sets the division between this content and this content. And you can see here I'm using a neutral color, but on top of the neutral color, I'm using black with 20% opacity so that it fits with each other. And like I said, I like to use opacity a lot because regardless of what color I'm going to use, it's going to fit. Versus using a flat color without opacity, you are restricted to whatever hue that you're using in your main app. So that is really important to note. What else? I've been talking a lot about Glassmorphism. This is something that I love to experiment with because in iOS we use that pretty much everywhere. And the only difference for me is that I started using the outline more. And this is absolutely optional. You don't need to set that, but I do like to use the outline sometimes to set the separation between, let's say, this input versus the background. So if I remove the outline here, you're going to see that there's very little separation between the background of the input versus the background of the model itself. And what I also love to do, and this is something I'm exploring, again, requires a little bit more effort, is to use that stroke, and I'm actually using blending mode for that stroke, which is really nice. So here I'm using overlay, and the reason why is because it adapts to the color of the background. So you can see here is more like purplish, and here's more is more pinkish, and that's because of the background underneath. So it gives this level of vibrancy that I'm looking for. So iOS does use vibrancy a lot. For example, you can use in SwiftUI the vibrancy on top of the background blur. And you know, if you go to Siri mode, if you go to the widget mode, you're going to see a lot of the vibrancy effects. So blending mode is definitely something that designers are starting to use more and more. It adapts really well to the colors in the background. And instead of using just white with opacity, you can use white with overlay or soft light. So this is quite interesting that you can start using. Now, the other thing that I also want to discuss is this sort of angular gradient blur. So let me show you the technique involved. You're gonna have this main button, okay? So this is just a main button that has an outline, but to make it more interesting, if you will, and it's not that much effort, it's just an extra layer underneath. So if I remove these two layers, you're gonna see that is essentially a radial gradient, an angular gradient, sorry. So with blur. So if I remove the layer blur, you're gonna see that it's essentially just an angular gradient. And I add the blur. So this is gonna be using the same dimension as the main button. It's a layer underneath it, and it's blurred, which gives this really nice glow effect. So I got this inspiration from the M1 chip. So M1 chip from Apple, they started using this kind of glow effect that I found really interesting. And, you know, I thought, well, this is definitely possible in the design tool. And this is definitely possible in the code as well. So that's kind of what led to this glow on this button. Instead of just using a normal glow with a single color, I'm using a glow that is circular, which means that I have more flexibility in terms of what colors I'm using. And here Apple is using sort of a rainbow color, which is really cool, but you don't need to do that. You can also use, in this case, I'm using more on the pinkish and blue side, which is the theme of DesignCode. We use a lot of that blue, purple, and slightly pinkish. So that's how I'm doing this. And you can definitely play more with the colors, such as this one, to show that, you know, this is being active. So this input, you know, the user is tapping on it and it's active, which gives this super nice glow effect. And, you know, play with it, play with the blending mode on the outline, play with the background blur, and you're going to create these beautiful effects that is going to make your app stand out. Now, of course, with any design, with any techniques, takes a lot of practice. Try to get feedback as much as you can, and always try to get a good contrast ratio. So you can see that this white here against the dark has a good contrast ratio for readability. And you know, when you use opacity, especially on a white, try to not go below 60%, 70%, so that you have a good contrast ratio. If you're not sure, just use white. But otherwise, 60%, 70%, 80% are pretty good zones for your secondary text. And yeah, you can use pretty much this in a lot of places that instead of using, you know, a colorful button, which is what you see a lot on iOS, um, you can use a dark button with that angular glow in the background. So I just want to put it out there. I think this is something I'm starting to see more and more, and I think that's really interesting. As with any new technique, you know, it takes times for the community to adopt, and I like to be experimenting ahead, right? Like we want to be there to be, you know, ahead of the curve and sort of like contribute to the community in terms of like what can we do that could be interesting in the future. The same here, you know, I use this angular glow and it creates this really beautiful effect. You can see it's almost like a shading effect. And if you're able to rotate the colors, you're gonna create some really interesting, inexpensive animations in the background. And I find that so fascinating. The same with the angular gradient here. You can use an angular gradient on this circle. So you've seen a lot of this from the Apple Watch. And you can definitely use an angular gradient for this. And the Apple Watch, by the way, is using the angular gradient on those little ring that completes. And it's really, really cool. I find that fascinating. So again, really awesome to be using this background blur layer on top of, let's say, an illustration or something that is a little bit colorful in the background, because, you know, when you're presenting a product, when you're presenting, you know, a hero element, such as the top portion of a course, you know, you want to captivate their attention, you want to get them excited. And of course, not all your UI has to be super exciting. I realize that a lot of my UIs are like, you know, almost going to a disco bar. But what you need to realize is that, you know, some of these portions takes a lot of context into play. So for example, you know, sometimes I'm gonna have these colors and they're very isolated and not necessarily what you're gonna see 90% of the time that you're gonna be spending on the app. But in those portions where, let's say you wanna purchase, you wanna excite people, right? Like it's like going to the Apple store. You want to be excited by, you know, a beautiful display of iPhones, Apple Watch, and computers. You know, in some of these interactions, you also want to excite them, but maybe not for the main content where they're going to be spending 90% of their time, such as the text here, which is essentially just white on dark, or some of these buttons here, but definitely like the hero element, or like a purchase experience, or, you know, the play button that goes to the video screen. You want to make it more exciting, and also such as this button here that gives you an overlay, and so you have this beautiful animations that's going to be using rotation 3D effect. And you know, I want to use this little circle that is going to orbit around the big circle like a planet around the sun. And so you can definitely be playful with some of these animations, and you know, explore a lot of ideas to, you know, to sell some of the elements, such as some of the content that you have in your design. But like I said, most of the time it's the neutral stuff that they're going to be looking at. So for example, you know, this content here, this content here, they're going to be reading the content, they're going to be watching the video, and you have to have a balance of the two, right? Like you can't just have crazy colors everywhere. This is equally important to give a break to the eyes. It's like, you know, when you read, you go to the next line, it gives you that energy to move forward. And in design, it's the same way. When you use a lot of colors, you want to make sure that you're switching between the neutral colors, and then something that maybe you want to give more attention to, and that you know that people are going to be interacting a lot more with, and then you switch to the more neutral colors, and then eventually you go more to the colorful stuff. So switch, 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 and that's typically how I like to design. I don't like to kind of like inundate just with colors. But yeah, of course, when it comes to presentation, it's slightly different because using an app versus presentation is two different things, two different use case. So this is an interesting tab where it's your account, and you're gonna be kind of like looking at your favorites, your downloads, updates, and some of the FAQ stuff. This could be part of the 5th tab, and I thought about kind of like tapping on here and going to the profile, so you can do like this beautiful transition between these two cards, and then you can have this gesture transition that we explored last week in SwiftUI using these cards as well. And the same with the certificate. So when you tap here, it goes to the bigger version, and it's going to flip, and then you have these gestures just the same way. That is going to move around and have this beautiful effect. So yeah, speaking about dark mode, again, having good contrast ratio, using between black, using a lot of opacity, using white as a text, and about 70% white for the secondary text. And then wherever you feel that you need to bring more attention, such as buttons, such as progress or stuff like that, then you can add a little bit of colors without overwhelming your users, right? Like you have to prioritize the right place. So for example, here, if it's just a normal button, I don't want to add the color here because then it's going to compete with the hero, and it's also going to compete with the content here. So for example, let me just give you an example here. If I was to give, I don't know, a blue here, you can see that suddenly we have too much competition between 3 different contents, such as the hero, this button, and this content. It's important to not make them compete too much. And that's why you have your color here, you have your break, and then you have a little bit of color here. And that gives a good balance between these 3 elements. Here I could be a little bit more playful because you want to use colors to express something that is positive. So if you pass the test, then you add a little bit of colors. Yeah, congratulations, and that can be really interesting. So let me just make this a little bit smaller for the webcam. There you go. All right, so yeah, like I said, most people are gonna be looking at here first, and then they're gonna be scrolling, and they're gonna be reading, and basically here is just very neutral. It's a very neutral zone, and it's just clean. Don't want to have too many colors except for the images and for the text. Here, what is interesting here is that we have a lot of colors, and then if I added like a very vibrant blue, then it's going to compete too much with the hero portion. So I think it works really well to have this more neutral blue and with a bit of gradient blur in the background. So I thought this worked quite well without stealing too much attention, but still exciting to some extent the idea of of purchasing or learning more about the content and going to the purchase screen. All right. Okay, let's talk about annotations. So one thing that I realized is that when you work in a team, you have to give a lot of feedback. And typically in Figma, you want to give feedback by using the C and add a comment. But the thing about comments is that it's more like a notification base and not necessarily something that is a documentation. It's more like, okay, this is something that we have to fix. And once it's fixed, then the person can click on resolve the comment, which is really useful because let's say I want to add a comment saying, okay, I want this text to be changed to be slightly smaller or slightly bigger. The person received the comment, they fix it in the code, and then they resolve the comment and it disappears. But when it comes to annotation, this is where it's more like documentation for everyone to see, and so that they don't miss, especially for a first time the UI hasn't been implemented yet, right? And such as here, the UI has not been implemented here. So I want to discuss some ideas around some of these concepts that I have in my mind. So you can see that here I'm saying, okay, well, I want to have a slight short intro on the colors. I want this color to be 20% using opacity versus the light mode. So if you compare to the light mode, for example, I have this this color portion that is not going to fit in when you go to dark mode. So in light mode, I have to think about the logic behind some of these design decisions. So for example, if I set this color to be 100%, then it's going to be too bright. And we're barely going to see this planet in the background or this avatar. And that's why we have to tone it down to about 20% in dark mode. So I add the annotation. The plugin that I'm using, by the way, is called Auto. So I link that. I'm going to link that in the description. And you can install that in the community. You can search for Auto Arrow or Arrow Auto. I guess their search is not. Wait a second. I'm not in the plugins. Okay. So Arrow, we have a bunch of here. I really like this one. The reason why I really like this one is because when I add the annotation, it's going to follow. So let's say I move this. Wait a second. I thought it was following. Just a sec. Okay, I guess it's not following probably because I'm grouping it or something. But let's say I copy this text and I put it here, and using this element, I need to set a second element, such as, let's say I want to make a comment about this avatar specifically. I select these two elements and I press on command / find the name. Typically the command itself is the name of the plugin. It's going to be Arrow Auto, and it's going to open that that plugin window, which is right here. So let me select those elements again. And here we have the choice between these different arrows. So for example, I can have like, you know, on one corner it's a circle, the other corner is going to be an arrow. Otherwise, both can be a circle. When I click on link, it's going to link like this. Now, what is beautiful about this is that once that is done, I can move it and see how the line, the bezel, like the curve, is following the text. And this is something that I really like, because it makes it so much more flexible when it comes to annotation, because oftentimes you are going to move your arrows, you want to make as flexible as possible, and you want also to annotate against a sub element inside your screen, versus some of the other plugins, you have to sort of like group elements together, or it can only, the arrow can only go to like a very specific artboard itself. So I found this plugin to be really useful. What I do notice is that they should definitely add like a padding option. And if you don't add the padding option, you can see that the circle is too close to the text. So one thing that I did to solve this was to group it and then add auto layout and add a little bit of padding. So, you know, you can definitely do that. You just need to recreate it again. But, you know, it's just a little nitpicking on my side. But yeah, this is really useful for expressing some of the comments and ideas that I might have. So all the things that I just explained earlier, I put that in the comments, such as the animations that I want for this tooltip here, for some of the text saying, okay, this should be maximum 3 lines, and then tap to maximize the content. So for example, if I have 2 lines, then this portion is going to be smaller, but it's going to align to the bottom of the UI. Or I want to express some of the animations that I want for this favorite button. So it's going to use a scale animation. It's going to bounce, just like in the flashlight button in iOS. When you press on it, it kind of bounces, and that's kind of the animation that I want to use. It's also going to use a pulsation circle that's going to bounce maybe in a different timing versus the button itself. So those are some ideas that I wanted to express in the comments, and I thought that was quite interesting to explore. So in terms of gradients, as I mentioned before, try to save your gradients whenever you create new gradients. Try to explore different gradients. So for example, here, you want to have these gradients always at the ready whenever you explore with colors. So here maybe I want to use a different gradient. Okay. And see, this is simply a duplication of the first layer that is using blur and angular. And so you can save these gradients. Okay. And since you have these saved, then you can play around and see what fits best in whatever context. Sometimes the purple one and the pink one works better, and sometimes the more colorful works better. And it depends on the theme, but you can see this is pretty cool. You can definitely play with the size of the blur as well, like this. So you can make it maybe 10 to have a more sharpness to that overlay. 20, which is what I use, or 30 if you want to make it a little bit more subtle instead of using opacity. So to save the gradient, first of all, let's say you want to edit this. Right now it's part of my design system, so I'm going to detach the style. And if I want to edit it, I'm going to go here, and now I have 4 colors. Okay, just like the M1 the M1 chip design, you know, it has kind of like 4 colors. And so I can play with the colors. What I do suggest is to play mostly with the hue. So play with the colors that you feel works best with your theme. Each app has their own primary color. So let's say your color is going to be slightly green and slightly blue. Then you can move the hue around that. When it comes to the brightness and the saturation, you want to move it around here and not here, right? You don't want to have too much saturation. Your saturation should be roughly between, I don't know, 60 to 80, and definitely have a lot of brightness because it's a glow, right? So a glow should be bright, but the color itself is going to tone down that brightness versus having a light, a white color, for example. So here you can see that I'm playing with some colors that might work better. So I can play more with, you know, pink or, right? So definitely have a lot of fun with these things. It's a lot about exploration. And so when you have your gradient, you want to save it somewhere. So you're gonna click on the plus, no, not here, but you're gonna click on the color styles, and then you're gonna save it, and it's going to be added as part of your color styles here. And if you do have a design system, then you want to save a bunch of gradients that you can reuse in multiple places or multiple files. So for example, if I create a new design file, such as this one, I want to go, if you're part of the team, so you want to go to the assets, like to the team libraries, and you want to enable one of the design systems that you have. But first, you're going to need to save this, and you're also going to need to publish it. Okay, you're going to need to publish the original file where you have all of these color styles and text styles. And when you publish it, then in whatever new file that you have elsewhere, you're going to be able to enable those color styles and gradient styles and text and colors, and you're going to be able to use that consistently without staying in the same file. So this is definitely one problem that we've been dealing with a lot is, oftentimes we just put everything in a single file and we have multiple pages. It gets a little bit hectic. It definitely affects performance a lot. And that's why sometimes I like to create a new file and just, organize my things so that we can be more performant and work a little bit less in a giant file and more in separate files as much as possible. But I do enjoy working in the same file because, especially when I'm working by myself, I can quickly reference the stuff that I have created in the past, and I can just move things around. And design is a lot about morphing from one point to another rather than just always starting from scratch. So that's why you're going to be seeing a lot of the same buttons in multiple places rather than always starting from scratch. So for example, this backward button is essentially the same as the close button, which should be here. Same size, and all I need to change is the SF symbol. So when I do that, then when it's used as across multiple screens, then you can start creating a component out of it and then using a copy. The same with these avatars. It's reused in multiple places. These buttons are going to be reused in multiple places. The input, another thing that I like to use is when it comes to dark mode, I like to use the same hue as the background and then use opacity. So oftentimes, designers are going to use black with opacity, but what I like to use as well is dark blue with opacity. So that's what I've been using for these modal. I think it gives a little bit more hue, like environmental sort of environment color that fits better with the theme, the hue color of your main app. So that's definitely what you can do with some of these Glassmorphic layer. So here, for example, I'm using white, but I can also use light blue if I want to give a little bit more context, if you will. Now, this here does not make a big difference, but in some places it will make some difference. But white and black is definitely safe. White and black with opacity 10%, 20% with the Glassmorphic layer, so the background blur here. And I like to set between 20 to 40. In iOS, it's more like 40. So the more you're gonna set the blur, I would say minimum 10, definitely, if you have control over it. In iOS, because we're using the visual effect blur, you don't really have control over the strength of the blur, but you do have control over the opacity, if you will. Like they have this thing called material sheet, so they have between ultra thin and ultra thick. So the more thickness it has, the more contrast that you're gonna have for your text against the background. And so it's more gonna be around 40 in terms of blur, and the more thickness, then you can add the fill color. So for example, if it's white, but in this case, you want to set the background to be the opposite color of the text. So if the text is white, then the background should be using sort of like a black, like this. Now, if your text is black, so I like to use 0 and press enter. Then you want to contrast it with using white instead. So that's kind of like how I play with the contrast, is to set the opposite color between the two. All right. I think that's basically it in terms of dark mode. I don't know if I'm forgetting anything. I have discussed in the past about different resources for getting your gradient colors, such as gradient. You can get 2-3 colors for your gradient. Definitely 3 or 4 colors is good for the angular. I don't think there's a resource yet for angular gradients. Maybe someone can share some resources for angular gradients, but definitely gradient is something that is very present in the resources. You also have another one called coolers.co, and here you have different colors, and also you can explore the gradients. For angular gradient, I would say it's still a new concept for most designers. I think most designers are still not using radial gradient or angular gradients, but I do believe that this is something that might happen more often in the future as we get more exposed to this technique. So you can essentially use the same colors, double or triple colors, and here we can use these 3 colors and apply that to the angular gradient that we have in our design. So you have some really interesting colors here that goes really well together. Otherwise, you can always use the color system from Material Design, and you can play with these colors using the color tool. You can change the hue, and it's going to give you a pretty good set of colors that goes well together. So for example, for your angular gradient, you can use this color plus this color plus this color plus this color, and it should work pretty well in this case. I can go to the color tool. I think it's even better. All right. So for example, I can use one of these colors here, and it's gonna give me my my tones. So the darker one and the lighter one, and you can see that the darker ones works better with the light text, and the lighter ones works better with the black text. and that is to ensure that you have a good contrast ratio. And then you're going to set your secondary color, which is going to be essentially next to the primary color. So if this is purple, you can go to blue. You can also go to maybe red. And so these will complement each other well. It's really fun. So for example, these two colors are the colors that we like to use a lot for Design Plus Code. And you can see that I already have pretty much 6 colors that I can use in my design in places that I want to add more priority. And of course, in my angular gradient. So I'm gonna take some colors. I'm gonna take some questions from the audience before we leave. It's already been 45 minutes since the stream, and I actually wanted to explore the coding aspect, but unfortunately, I got a little bit blocked. I got a little bit caught up in the design. It's been really a lot of fun creating this design over the week, and sometimes when you're so focused on design, you have a little bit less time to code things. But definitely in the next days or next week, I'm going to be exploring this in SwiftUI. I'm already working on a new SwiftUI course, and also we have a lot of new SwiftUI tutorials. We just launched like Flutter for Designers course, and we have a ton of resources. We have these live streams, which hopefully helps a lot, and we also have a Discord channel if you need feedback on your design and if you need feedback on your code. So like I said, I'm going to take some questions, and please give us some thumbs up if you like this content. I'm going to create more based on what you like, of course, and it really helps a lot to have a bigger audience so that we can decide to spend more time on teaching and also exploring ideas during these live streams. So first question, what is this software? So this is Figma. Figma is a design tool that, that is an alternative to Photoshop, to Sketch, to Adobe XD, to name a few. And I would say is definitely one of the most mature design tool nowadays, where teams of big and small companies are pretty much using this on a daily basis. So the reason why this is a better choice than most of the other tools is that you have everything in the browser. And because everything is in the browser, it works on Windows, it works on Mac, and it works in the browser, which means that if you share this to someone else in your team, regardless of where they are, regardless of what they have installed, they're going to be able to see your design. They're going to be able to inspect your design quite easily. And they don't need to download anything. The fonts are there. They don't have font issues and stuff like that. Everything is saved in the cloud. So you can see here, none of these files are actually saved in my computer. They're all saved in the cloud. And when they are saved in the cloud, that means that regardless of which computer that I'm working from, such as I can switch from my laptop to my iMac, to my other laptop, to my iPad, I'm going to be able to see exactly the same files, the same design, and take it from there. And the same with the team. You're going to be able to share your design across your team, account managers, team editors, and content and stuff like that. And so they're going to be able to see the design, see the prototype pretty much everywhere. But most importantly, apart from that, I would say it's really good for designing. It has some of these great features such as auto layout, which I love. Auto layout essentially is what I use here, for example. So, traditionally when you create a layout like this one, without auto layout, you have to kind of like, if you want to add like a new content, look at that. If I set auto layout, if I don't set auto layout, sorry, I'm gonna have to resize it manually. So I guess I forgot to add auto layout here, but let me add auto layout. But you can see that I added auto layout here though. Let me just go back to these layers. Okay, so this is auto layout and this is auto layout, but the popover itself is not. So I'm going to switch this to auto layout, and boom, when I add a new element, Command D, it automatically fits within that dynamic bound of my popover. And the same with this middle line here. Okay, the separator, I'm going to do Command D, and then I press up arrow, and then I have another arrow in between these menu items. So now I can just change to another one. So subscribe. I don't know. I'm just inventing something for now. And I can change the SF symbols. All right. So just something super random like this or like this. And there you go. Just like that, I was able to create a new item. I don't need to adjust anything in terms of the bounds. So auto layout is one of the best features, I would say, that I love about Figma. They also just release interactive components, which is really good when you want to create a component that, let's say you have a button that have a hover state, and you want to be able to reuse that everywhere in multiple parts of your prototype. Then interactive component is really good. Yeah, those are some of the features. They have version control. They have, so many things. Is one of the most mature design tool out there. So that's why we love using Figma. What is the difference between Figma and Adobe XD? Good question. I think Figma, to me, from what I've seen, is more generally used. It has more maturity in terms of the design tools and the features. It has some of auto layout, all of these things that they have been doing for years and that are still fairly new in Adobe XD. I haven't really caught up to all of the latest updates, but from my latest my last assessment of the two tools, I would say that Figma is a little bit ahead in terms of the new features, in terms of some of the stuff such as interactive components, auto layout, color style, text styles, and prototyping, saving into the cloud, and all of these things. Figma has been at the forefront of the industry for, I think, for a couple of years already. So the other tool that I like to see as kind of like a front runner is Sketch. So Sketch has been a front runner for a number of years before Figma, but I would say recently Figma has been dominating pretty much the industry for the last year or so. Yeah, and the plugins. So the plugins are absolutely awesome. I think some of the best plugins I've ever seen are on Figma and Sketch, and the annotation plugin that I just demoed is definitely one of them. Looper, which actually is also available on Sketch. Unsplash, content generator, and all of these plugins. They also have this community layouts. This is really awesome. I really enjoy this. So if you go to community and you go to files, you're gonna see like a lot of icon sets, a lot of UI kits, a lot of content that are created and shared by the community around different UI patterns and stuff like that. So this is super nice. It's shareable on the web, and you can even like embed some of these Figma files and some of these Figma component directly on your website. It's just beautiful. I highly recommend Figma for sure. So let's see if we have more questions. Yes, so Figma is free for individuals. That's also really nice. So if you're not part of the team, you don't use the team libraries, Figma is free. So I don't know if they have limitation in terms of the number of projects, but it's free. And you can use all of these features. The only thing that you're not going to be able to use is the libraries, the team libraries, and that is for premium. And if you're part of the team, honestly, the price is very affordable. and you change, well, in Figma, the cursor is standard. It's just when you use some of these other features that you're gonna see, it's slightly different, right? I haven't really noticed it. That's a good question. Just now it was like a standard cursor. See, it switched to a standard cursor, and then suddenly when I click here, it goes to the other cursor. Interesting. Do you think this kind of design works for website as well? Yes, absolutely. So this design that I have here is actually a lot inspired by the web design that we have done. So if you go to the website, we try to be as consistent as possible between the website and the iOS app. The first version of the iOS app, I wanted to make it as basic as possible because we don't really have a mature iOS development team at the moment, but they have matured a lot over the past 3 months. And because they have matured a lot, I want to throw them more challenges. And so that's why I went back to the drawing board and I decided to elevate the design a little bit compared to the first version of the iOS app. But if you look at the website, we have been exploring pretty much the same design patterns, and we have been exploring so many of these really interesting effects already, such as a Glassmorphism with 0.5 pixel outlines and stuff like that. A lot of interactions, a lot of animations, and I love to be sort of ahead whenever possible. Of course, sometimes as a designer, you have to consider the limitations of your team, the deadlines that you have. So, for example, in our team, we don't have the resources in the world. We're only like a few developers, a few designers in the team, and I have to create courses on top of that. I have to create these live streams on top of that. I have to design everything in SwiftUI, design in Figma, and you have to consider your limitations, your bandwidth. And so sometimes there's nothing wrong with having a more basic design, right? And that's totally fine. But whenever you can, especially when you have an awesome team of developers that can support that effort, such as you want to create like a very custom tab bar, if you have the resource for it, go for it. There's many apps such as Instagram, such as all of these popular apps, Clubhouse, they have very custom controls. If you have the resource for it, go for it. But at the same time, if you're like a smaller team, you have to divide your time more strictly, then yeah, it's totally fine to go with a more basic layout as long as you respect some of the rules which I teach in my UI design for developers course and my Figma design system course that you can take. We also have multiple content around design and code. So we have the tutorial, which is really good for going topic by topic, and we have the course, which is more going from step 1 to step 100, and you want to build something with me, and you want to follow every step of the way with one section following the next one. But the tutorial, what we try to do is that you have one topic and we always start from step 1. And I received some feedback from the community, and they actually said they enjoy both sides of the content. The course is great for kind of like beginners. If you've never done something like SwiftUI, the course is great because it's going to handhold you from step 1. Versus once they get a little bit more mature, they want to reference the content in SwiftUI and they want to search, reference back, go back to that content multiple times, and learn new techniques. So we go a lot deeper as well in terms of the SwiftUI handbook. So for example, we have 80 sections, ranging from database, Firebase, and API stuff to the more animation stuff, match geometry effect and stuff like that. So that's why we've been putting a lot of efforts into the handbook, and we want to make sure that we have two sides of the learning paths. So Miro, I'm not familiar with Miro. By the way, in terms of design system, I have shared this link, but I find this really useful for a lot of designers who are beginners. So there's a website called Design System. Yeah, Design System repo. I'm gonna be sharing all of these links, by the way, as part of the description. So what I like about Design System is that it really teaches you a lot about, you know, some of the basics, such as typography, colors, gradients, consistency, components, layout, and all of these things. Of course, I always suggest that you go to the material design design system, but also the iOS design system. But it's also interesting to see from the community what they create at these different startups, such as Salesforce and Stripe and these other awesome companies that makes beautiful designs. Also, as part of the community in Figma, there are a number of design systems that are being shared as well. I believe I've seen one from Visual Studio Code. Let me just make sure. Yeah, see, this one from Microsoft is really awesome. And they share the entire design system around creating Visual Studio Code. You can learn so much from analyzing the files that are provided from all of these resources, from the courses that you follow. And what we try to do at Design Plus Code as well is that we try to share the design source for all of these live streams and course and tutorials. So here we have a place called design files, and all of these design files are shared for every single live stream. So today I'm going to be sharing this file here that you're going to be able to download and just analyze how I create each of the layers, the angular gradient blur. But unfortunately, it's for our subscribers. We have to somehow, make a living out of this. So, the video, of course, the live stream, I'm happy to share it with everyone. But yes, the courses are not free, and the design files, the source code, you have to be a subscriber. Of course, we appreciate all our subscribers, and that's thanks to them that we're able to do this each and every single day and provide all of this content for you. So yes, I will be sharing all of these design files, all of these designs, and let me just make sure that you see where it is. So after the end of each live stream, I put this on the website. So for example, last week, I put this one. And so you have here the source file. Okay. And the same for the design file for each of the live stream. If you're a subscriber, you're going to be able to see the download, and you're going to be able to click on the source file. And the source files are these Figma files that you're going to be able to explore yourself. So what would you say is some of the most important things to remember when designing something new other than the heuristic design principles? I mean, there's so many things that I can cover about design. I think, it depends also on what kind of person you are. Are you the kind of person who likes to Google everything to find the resources by yourself, or are you the kind of person who learns a lot from a very specific learning path, like a course? So what I would say is that try to follow some of these resources, try to explore, and I think one of the best things I can recommend is the design systems that you can explore. So for us, we like to provide all of these components that we create. And so by exploring, you're going to be learning so much. And by understanding the design system, in turn, it's going to strengthen the rest of your execution. The design system provides a consistent idea on how to use some of these content, the buttons, the text, so the color styles, the text styles, the gradients, that has to be reused across multiple places. One of the key mistakes that most designers make is that they don't use a design system, so each and every single screen looks like a different app. And you don't want that. You want your app to be very consistent across the board. And that's why to learn how to create a design system is so crucial to be a better designer and to be a better team player as well. So, one thing that we try to teach to our junior designers is how to create their own components, how to set auto layout. So for example, if you have more content, it's just going to automatically push the rest of the buttons. So these two buttons are being pushed because this one has two lines. And so when you learn how to use some of these features, such as auto layout, such as constraints, such as resizing, hugging the content, it's going to take you so far into how to understand how to work better with developers, with designers, with your teammates, like content editors and so on and so forth, and how to work with real content versus just working with a fake lorem ipsum all the time. So make sure that you really utilize these techniques as much as possible, and you see what other people are doing in some of these bigger teams that you might want to join eventually in the future. So if you want to join a team at Apple or at Google or at Stripe or at any of these companies, make sure that you see how they work. And most likely they have a very set design system in place. And that's why it's really important to study that aspect. Are you going to do a course on Angular for designers? Angular, we don't have a big team. We have myself, we have Sai, we have Surya, we have Stephanie, who's creating really great content. We depend a lot on what the team is using right now to create the content, because we want to be passionate about the tool, and we also want to be knowledgeable enough about those tools from a beginner's mind to be able to create these content for you. And because we're not using Angular, it wouldn't make sense for us to create content around Angular. And that's why we're focusing on React, because we use React for our website. We use Gatsby, Netlify, all of these. We use Contentful. And then for the iOS app, of course, we use Figma, we use SwiftUI. And so we create our entire app in SwiftUI because we teach SwiftUI. And so we find that to be super important to be able to teach what we actually use. So let's see if we have some last questions. I think that's basically it. Thank you everyone for joining this live stream. I'll see you next week. And please don't forget to give a thumbs up if you like this. And so I'll see you next week then. Bye-bye.